Okay, this is the second lecture for the week. Um, we'll call it the 25th, Wednesday's lecture. Let me go ahead and expand this thing. There we go. Okay, of course, this is where we stopped before. Researchers have discovered that hunger comes from the lateral area of the hypothalamus. As an individual's blood sugar level drops, the lateral hypothalamus will secrete more and more of the hunger-triggering hormone orexin. Satiety is triggered in the ventromedial nucleus of the hypothalamus. So as you can see, hunger and satiety are both controlled in the hypothalamus, but in different areas of the hypothalamus. Fat is stored in the body in storage cells called adipocytes. The normal weighted person will maintain about 30 billion adipocytes. An obese person may have as many as 200 billion adipocytes. The difference is the amount of fat in each adipocyte. Adipocytes will trigger hunger. The stronger the feeling of hunger, and this is one of the reasons why obese people have a more difficult time. As you can see, they have 200 billion adipocytes. Well, when they get hungry, they get 200 billion cells telling them that they need to eat, whereas a normal weighted individual, they only have 30 billion adipocytes screaming at them. An obese person has 200 billion, and of course that is a lot more screaming from an obese person's fat cells than from a normal person's fat cells. Insulin is produced in the pancreas. When glucose levels fall, we produce insulin, which makes us feel hungry. When we consume food, glucose levels rise and we produce less insulin and we feel less hungry. The intestines also release cholecystokinin, which signals satiety. It is cholecystokinin that has been blamed for people's sweet tooth. And my dad was a person that anytime he came across sugar, he would eat it, but he had a fairly high metabolism rate, and he worked very hard, and he worried about his kids a lot, so he didn't really have a problem with being overweight, but he was a consumer of sugar products. My mother, not so much, but my dad, anytime he came across sugar, he wanted to eat it. Interestingly, the Bradway family, there were two twin brothers, Otis and Otis, as strange as that may sound. And one of them manufactured candy, and they were from Eastern Indiana, and he lived in Newcastle, Indiana. Anyway, they had a huge candy factory. So one part of the family, my grandfather was a heavy equipment operator, and he was a road builder. He built roads. As a matter of fact, he was one of the people that built the Indianapolis 500. And his brother, of course, his twin brother was a candy manufacturer, a famous candy manufacturer that you potentially may be able to find on the internet, I guess. But anyway, they were Otis and Otis. And my grandfather's name was Otis, O-T-T, and Otis, O-T-I-S. O-T-T-I-S and O-T-I-S. Why in the world you would name identical twins almost the same thing? When I was teaching in Nebraska at Platteview High School, I had two brothers. One was Bryant and the other was Brian. So it was kind of difficult to tell which one you're talking to, since their names are almost identical. They were identical twins. Really kind of odd that you would name identical twins almost the same thing. Two other appetite-inducing hormones are ghrelin and peptide YY. Ghrelin is secreted by the stomach, which induces the pituitary gland to release growth hormone, which stimulates your appetite. Peptide YY is an appetite suppressant. And ghrelin, of course, is makes you have a stronger appetite. Overweight women are more likely to be depressed and suicidal than women of a normal weight. Oddly, underweight men are more likely to be depressed and suicidal than men of a normal weight. I don't want you to get strange if you look at this. This isn't a real human. It's a mannequin. You can see the lines over by his shoulders. Why you make a mannequin anorexic, I'm not exactly sure. Anyway, underweight men are depressed and suicidal, and overweight women are depressed and suicidal. The most frequent means of measuring obesity is body mass index. Body mass index is calculated by multiplying your weight in pounds by 705 and dividing by your weight and your height in inches, and then again by your height in inches once again. And that gives you your BMI. My BMI is right around 24, I think. Normal body fat for men is between 18 and 23%. I'm right around 17%, which makes me a little low. Normal body fat for women is 25 to 30%. And as you can see, a woman who doesn't have hardly any body fat, as you can see, she looks a little, it doesn't look quite normal. This looks better, between 15 and 17%. Of course, women won't ovulate unless they have a select amount of body fat. It's right around 10%, and then they will ovulate. A lot of athletes don't have that, so they don't ovulate. They don't have periods. This is a woman between 15 and 17%. It's a woman between 20 and 22%. 25% looks more normal. 30% looks okay. 35% starting to look a little paunchy. 40%, 45%, and then 50%. That's an unfortunate tattoo she's put on her abdomen there. But that's my own personal opinion, I guess. Weightlifters and other athletes tend to maintain excessive muscle mass and little body fat, but maintain a BMI in the 25 to 30 range. So one of the jobs I had when I was in the service was to maintain the weight control program. Had a really difficult time with my bodybuilders. Some of them were on steroids, not all of them were on steroids, but even if they were on steroids, or weren't on steroids, of course, they would have larger necks, they would have bigger thighs, more muscular thighs, and because of that, of course, their BMI tended to be fairly high. It doesn't determine where the fat is being carried, of course, that's one of the problems. Body fat in the waist area can be a problem, but fat in any other area should not cause any problem. So as long as you don't have a spare tire, you're okay. Unfortunately, of course, if we look at some American Indians, some select tribes, the Pueblos Indians, Zunis and the Tejano O'odham and the Pima, they're kind of short and they're kind of squat. Unfortunately, when they put on weight, they put on weight around their waists. When I was up in Montana, they do have diabetes up there. They don't have it at the level that you guys have it in the Southwest. But I was talking to somebody one day, and it turns out that the people up there, when they put on extra body weight, they put it on in their backs. As weird as that, as strange as that is, and they call it the buffalo hump. And so, anytime they gain any extra weight, of course, their thighs do get big and their waists do get large, but they tend to put on some body. They accumulate body fat in their backs, between their shoulder blades. We're really kind of different, a little bit different, not the same. Another way to measure obesity is by measuring waist to hip ratio. Measure your waist at its slimmest point, measure your hips at their widest point, divide your waist by your hip measurement. Anything below 0.8 is normal for a woman. Anything below 0.95 is normal for a man. And as you can see, we're looking at perfection here. Okay. Yeah. Hip to waist ratio. waist to hip ratio. The incidence of hypertension in people who are 50% or more overweight is 3 to 5 times that of normal weight individuals. The prevalence of metabolic, I think we've seen this picture before, the prevalence of metabolic syndrome, coronary artery disease, stroke, diabetes, inflammation, increases with your BMI. Overweight men are 6 times as likely to develop metabolic syndrome. Obese men are 32 times as likely to develop metabolic syndrome. Overweight women are 5 times as likely to develop metabolic syndrome. Obese women are 17 times more likely to develop metabolic syndrome. And this may have something to do with why males die of cardiovascular disease so readily. Obese children are more likely to have problems that we used to only see in adults. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, breathing problems from asthma or sleep apnea, fatty liver disease, and of course type 2 diabetes. You can imagine how tragic it is to be a 5 or 6-year-old with type 2 diabetes. During adolescence, obesity and metabolic syndrome are linked to impairments in brain structures. It reduces your hippocampal volume. In other words, it reduces your probability of memory. It reduces your white matter, which also reduces the amount of speed that your thinking processes can take. Obesity promotes hyperinsulinemia, an endocrine disorder in which insulin progressively loses its effectiveness in sweeping glucose from the bloodstream into the cells of the body. This leads to type 2 diabetes, and that, of course, is a very serious problem. Here's the problem that I have. The liver function manufactures more triglyceride and cholesterol in people with excess body weight, increasing the risk of arthritis, gout, and gallbladder disease. I developed gout as an 18-year-old. I was running track at the time. I weighed about 135 pounds. I had very little body fat. So being overweight wasn't my problem, but I've had a problem with gout all my life, and it's one of those things that has probably not been a bad thing. I have to stay away from fish, but I also have to stay away from beer, from most alcoholic beverages. I can't drink wines, I can't drink beer, I can't really drink distilled spirits either, or my feet, the knuckles of my big toe will flare up just like what you see in this picture. It's really the most painful thing you can possibly imagine, except for kidney stones. Women who have given birth and had kidney stones and have had gout say that the childbirth was nothing compared to the pain that they felt with their kidney stones and their gout. Complications following surgery happen often among the obese, as you can imagine. For one thing, you can't find a gurney that fits. This guy's really got a problem. He's doesn't really fit on the gurney. There's a strong correlation between obesity and cardiovascular disease in men and women, even after statistical adjustments are made for blood pressure, cholesterol, smoking, and age. Obesity increases the risk of certain cancers. Among adults, obesity is associated with lower psychological well-being, especially among women, and with a marked increase in depression. Obese people are mistakenly stereotyped as being slow, lazy, and undisciplined. Compared to women of equal intelligence, obese women earn less money, they are less likely to be married, they are underrepresented among corporate CEOs. Why they put words on the backs of people's clothes, I'm not exactly sure. Makes people look at their butts. But as you can see, I'm guessing this lady is not much of a gold digger, but that's what her pants say. She's a gold digger. But of course, being overweight isn't the only problem. Being underweight can also be a problem, especially for people over the age of 65. Before the age of 65, obesity makes it more likely that you will die. After age 65, the people that are the most likely to die are people who are underweight. So this lady is in danger. She has no reserves. So if she ever gets sick with anything, it will probably kill her. And that is a really serious problem. Another risk factor is yo-yo dieting, which puts excessive strain on the cardiovascular system. I have a friend that they've done studies, and the people that stay hungry all the time, these people are supposed to live longer. And that's his theory in life. So he doesn't eat very well. But now we know as you get older, the more slender you are, the more difficult it is for you to recover from the disease. He came down with the flu just before graduation. I was working with him at Ashford, and he came down with the flu just before graduation, about 2 weeks before graduation. He missed finals. He missed graduation. He was down for about 6 weeks, and it was just the flu. It was just a cold, but because he had no reserves, he almost died, and the reason is because he was so slender. So as we are in this coronavirus pandemic, one of the groups of individuals that are in danger of dying is somebody who has no extra body fat, and that's not a good thing. So if you're as skinny as this lady, you're as anorexic as this lady, you got a problem. Twin and adoption studies have shown that heredity plays about a 30% chance of causing obesity. Heredity contributes to obesity by dictating the basal metabolic rate. One longitudinal study that lasted 32 years found that people were the most likely to be obese if they had friends who were obese. The closer the friend, the more likely that they would be obese. People under stress are more likely to eat in the absence of hunger, and of course, that is not the time to be eating. You need to eat 3 squares a day if you're active, physically active. If you're not physically active, you don't need to eat three meals a day. 2 meals a day are fine. The average woman in the United States today is 5 foot 4 inches tall. She weighs between 140 and 150 pounds. Her waist size is between 34 and 35 inches, and her dress size is between 12 and 14. This is what somebody who's 150 pounds, 5 foot 4, with a 34-inch waist, this is what she looks like. This is what women looked like back in the 70s. 50 years ago, the same woman only weighed 120 pounds. Her waist was between 24 and 25 inches, and she wore a size 8 dress. If you just click in there and put women in 1970, of course, you're going to see some odd things, but one of the things you're going to see is women who are a lot smaller. And they were all smaller. There wasn't nearly the obesity that there is today. And of course, there's a lot of different reasons for that. One of them is that we eat a lot. We eat too much fast foods. We don't exercise enough. So people of the 1970s were a lot healthier. And of course, this was my era. I joined the military, graduated from college in 1971, joined the military in 1971. So this is my era. This is normal for me. Seeing all those obese people, seeing people that look like this. She looks fat to me. Oh, did I say fat? She is fat. A lot of these people look fat to me. That lady is fat. Because when I was growing up, the lady on the left looks fat. And it's because when I was growing up, we didn't have people that looked like that. This is obese as far as I'm concerned. Because when I was growing up, people weren't that big. And now they are. Now they're as big as the 50% and 45% and 40% individuals. That's fat. All these people are fat to me. And the reason is because that's not the way people looked when I was growing up. They looked more like this. So if everybody looked this way, you know, the fat people look really different to me. People were a lot smaller back then in the 1970s. And it's because we ate better food. Even though we were eating bacon and eggs for breakfast, we were still eating better food, and we were getting outside and exercising more. Not watching so much television. She's just big. 11.9% of the boys living in a family that is above poverty level are obese. 21% of the boys living below the poverty level are obese. 12% of the girls living above poverty level are obese. 19.3% of the girls living below the poverty line are obese. When I was in the service, sometimes we weren't really being paid very well. So a lot of times we didn't have as much food as we have today, or didn't have as much food. So when we were hungry, we would buy a select thing in order to be able to feed our families for more days. So what would we buy? Well, we would buy beans, and we would buy potatoes, and we would buy bacon so that we could cook all this stuff together and make a meal out of it. But today, of course, you guys eat, I don't know, jerky, and you eat a lot of really fatty foods. Potato chips, I don't know what you're eating. You go to Burger King and buy their Big Macs, or no, that Big Mac is McDonald's. You buy their Whoppers and whatnot. So we're eating a lot more greasy foods than we used to eat. And it's making us all just fat as toads. 12% of the girls living above the poverty level are obese, and 19.3% of the girls living below the poverty line are obese. Both men and women who have a college degree are less likely to be overweight. Reasons for people in the lower socioeconomic status being overweight: they have limited access to healthcare services. They have less knowledge about the dangers of obesity. They're less likely to be able to afford fresh fruits and vegetables, and they get less exercise. They live a more sedentary lifestyle, despite the fact that when they do work, they work at physical jobs. When they go home and they sit down and they play video games and watch Netflix, and they binge watch all these strange television shows, and they don't get enough exercise. Reasons people who are low in socioeconomic status are obese: they don't eat breakfast, they don't eat green vegetables, they don't eat fruit, they don't exercise, they watch too much television, they don't get at least 7 hours of sleep a night. And of course, as you can see, let's all buy fast foods and look like these two ladies. Dieting alone does not usually work to take off weight and keep it off. A good program will not only include dieting, but a regular exercise program as well to raise your basal metabolic rate. Americans spend billions of dollars on weight control programs every year. A lot of it has to do with them buying gym memberships and then never going to the gym. They can always find a good excuse not to go. When I was still at Saley, and I was working at the school, I wanted to lift weights twice a week, but I could only find time to do it once a week. The reality is I had access to the gym every day. Jeremiah went to the gym every day. I doubt if he's doing it now. I know the gym at the school is closed right now, but Jeremiah lifts every day, and that's one of the reasons why he's in such good physical condition. And that's good. You need to exercise as much as possible. All right. Weight loss won't happen unless you are motivated and self-disciplined. Set a weight loss goal that is realistic. Small goals can be adjusted downward when the small goals are accomplished. I decided that I was consuming too much sugar. It was putting too much fat on my gut. And because of that, I have decided to reduce the amount of pop that I drink. And like I said, I haven't had any in 2 days. I stopped about 2 weeks ago, and I've gone as long as 4 days without drinking any pop at all. The only time I'm drinking any soda is when I drive. It's when I get in the car, and then I will drink a can of Mountain Dew or a bottle of Mountain Dew or whatever. But that's the only time I'm drinking any pop. And of course, since we're in isolation, I haven't driven in a couple days, so I haven't had any pop in a couple days, which is okay. It's got a lot of caffeine in it, but oddly, I'm not sensitive to caffeine, and it's not bothering me at all. Make healthy food choices. Eat fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and healthy fats. That will keep you alive longer. Get more exercise. Exercise burns calories. It suppresses your appetite. It helps lower your weight set point. And of course, this guy's doing planks. There was some guy in his 50s that set a world record by planking for 28 hours straight or something like that, as weird as that is. Good for him. He's trying to lose weight. As you can see, his stomach's almost touching the ground, but that's okay. As long as he is planking, that's fine. Keep tempting food out of sight. Buy mostly fresh whole foods, fruits, vegetables, fish, lean proteins such as eggs, low-fat dairy products. Avoid processed packaged foods because they have sugar in them. They also have chemicals in them that we're not exactly sure. They're not really foods. It's just to keep it fresh. And strangely enough, of course, that can cause problems as well. Manage portion size. Keep meals simple and modest in size, even when eating healthy foods. My wife has gone on diets where instead of eating on a full-size plate, she eats on a saucer, and she puts all of her food there. That way it looks like she's got as much food as I'm eating, of course, in a full plate. But it really works. You don't really think of that you need more food. A lot of times if you eat and fill up your stomach, you're still hungry, and if you sit there for a while, for about 20 or 30 more minutes, before you take another bite, you won't be hungry, and you won't take that next bite. Don't starve yourself to eat one big meal. That doesn't work. This eating pattern slows metabolism and causes calories to be stored as fats. And of course, you don't really want to do that. Eat slowly and beware of binge eating. This is something that people in my family do. I have a brother that eats really slow. I have a son that eats even slower than my brother does. I'm a slow eater. It'll take me, if I sit down for supper, it may take me an hour and a half to eat all the food. Of course, by that time, I try to eat the warm food first and the cold food last. That's one of the reasons why if I have a salad, I usually eat it for dessert because it's cold and I don't have to worry about it getting hot, I guess. But the warm food, of course, you want to eat right away. Okay. People who eat slowly tend to eat less. They can conversely, you should not eat quickly. Eat when you drink alcohol or feel anxious. A lot of people that stay slender don't drink alcohol with their meals. They drink water with their meals, and that allows them. Alcohol, of course, kind of numbs your logic portion of your brain, and you consume more food than you need to. These situations can cause you to overeat, of course, so just don't do it. Behavioral and cognitive therapy to promote weight loss. Identify trigger eating cues and practice stimulus control. That's what I've done with Mountain Dew. I was drinking a lot of Mountain Dew just because for the sugar. I was trying to consume sugar. So when I got thirsty, and of course caffeine makes you thirsty anyway, so I was drinking probably more of that than I probably needed to. Now I'm drinking lemonade, and I'm not drinking nearly as much. So it was a trigger. It was a cue. Slow eating with self-control techniques. So you need to slow down your eating. A lot of people eat really, really rapidly. No, that's not a good idea. Get out of there. Sorry, I had a cat fight. So eat slowly, as slowly as you possibly can. Have conversations. Yeah, some people eat really fast, and that's not a good thing. Boost metabolism with aerobic exercise. Create small-term contracts when smaller goals are reached. Enlist family and friends to provide social support, which is not the easiest thing in the world. The first thing that my wife did was bring me a Mountain Dew. And I told her that I was trying to get off of it, which is kind of weird, but now she's on board. And I have a lot of self-control, so I'm not really worried about it. Maintain awareness by careful self-monitoring and record keeping. Anticipate urges, cravings, and high-risk situations with relapse prevention therapy. The record keeping is really kind of interesting. Some people are obsessive compulsive and they need to write everything down. This is really weird. This is how Jeremiah lifts. He will do a lift and then he'll write down what he did. And he says if he doesn't write it down, it doesn't count, which is really kind of interesting. I don't write anything down, but and I get through my workout without any problems, I guess. So, really interesting fella. He writes everything down. And you can tell him I said that. Self-directed dieting is recommended for people with mild to moderate obesity unless the individual has a history of weight cycling. For people who can not diet successfully on their own, there are commercial programs, Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig. I don't know, there's a ton of them out there. Anyway, so if you can't do it yourself, then you get somebody else to help you. Very low calorie and surgery are recommended only for people with medical problems complicated by obesity. I've known lots of people that have had this surgery. It's not always successful. You need to be very careful. We had two really serious cases in Montana when I was up there. Both of the individuals got their stomach stapled. One individual couldn't control his eating, and unfortunately, he kept eating it the same way. When you get your stomach stapled, one of the things you have to do is you have to eat a lot of small meals, and he had a hard time not. He had all this craving, and because he had this craving, he couldn't control his eating, and he ate too much, and he blew his stomach out, which sounds god-awful, and it is god-awful, but it killed him fairly quickly. The other individual got their stomach stapled, lost a lot of weight. They lost weight way too fast, and their body reacted negatively to the weight loss, and she developed a cancer. For people with, you've got to be smart when you do these surgeries, and they're only for people that are really, really grotesquely overweight, not for somebody that's 10 or 15 pounds. You've got to be 50 or 100 pounds overweight, and before you can do those kinds of things. And then you need to be monitored by a medical professional. For people with diabetes and other medical complications, medical supervision is always recommended for those individuals. Individual counseling and behavioral weight loss programs are considered appropriate for those with eating disorders. By promoting the availability of affordable, healthy food and beverages, how can communities and families support healthy living? By promoting availability of affordable, healthy food and beverages. Of course, this has been a huge complaint on the reservation. Bashes and the gas stations do not always carry the best foods. When they cook you food when they cook you food, it's always really greasy food, unfortunately. By supporting healthy food and beverage choices, promoting availability by supporting healthy food and beverage choices, something else that's not done here. Encouraging breastfeeding, I'm not exactly sure why. Well, actually, I do understand. Women who breastfeed tend to not be as large, and their children don't have the same cravings as children that are bottle fed, as weird as that is. Encouraging physical activity or limiting sedentary activity among youth and teens. And of course, this is something that the Just Move movement, Let's Move movement, or whatever it is that Michelle Obama has. You know, we need to support more activity with in your community, in our communities. Creating safe communities that support physical activity. It needs to be safe to go outside and exercise if you're a child, if you're being bullied, or if there's a danger of being shot. Of course, that's not supporting safe communities. Encouraging communities to organize for change. Now we're going to talk about the eating disorders. This lady is anorexic. As you can see, she has she has no body fat at all. Her muscle mass is decreasing. Sure. Anorexia nervosa is an eating disorder characterized by a failure to maintain body weight and a BMI below 18. It slows your thyroid function. You have irregular heartbeat. And of course, if you look at individuals, that the mortality rate is really high for people with anorexia. As you can see, between 2 to 15% of the individuals with anorexia die. And the reason is because a lot of the reasons are because of they have heart problems. They have an irregular heartbeat, and it just stops one day, and it doesn't start up again. And so heart problems are one of the problems with these individuals. Slow thyroid function, irregular heartbeat, irregular breathing, low blood pressure, dry and yellowed skin, as you can see. If she's trying to make herself more attractive, her skin certainly is not making her more attractive. Their bones become brittle. They can't exercise. When my daughter was, we were stationed in California. My daughter was playing freshman basketball. They had cheerleaders. They had varsity cheerleaders, and she was playing junior varsity basketball. But the varsity cheerleaders, they lost their cheerleaders because the junior varsity cheerleaders had to cheer for the varsity cheerleaders. The entire cheer section had become anorexic. And because they were anorexic, they had to stop cheering because it was too dangerous for them. They could break their bones and whatnot. Anyway, so the junior varsity went up to the varsity and started doing varsity games, and the junior varsity had no cheerleaders because the varsity cheerleaders were all banned from cheering because of their anorexia. Anemia, lightheadedness, dehydration, swollen joints, reduced muscle mass, of course, as you can see. Because you're not taking in enough calories, your body is burning protein, and of course, where do you have protein? You have protein in your muscles. So your muscles will atrophy, as you can see, and as you saw with that other individual. As you can see, wait a minute, let's go back to where he was. Yeah, this will make everybody sick. Yeah, there he goes. This guy, as you can see, he's got arm muscles here. Well, his muscles have atrophied, as have his legs. Here you've got striation in his legs, and here on the left side, it's, you know, you can count his ribs, and you can check out all of his muscles, as ugly as that is. Let me see what we can get up here. Oh no, what have I done? I've gone the wrong direction. Okay, here we go. Anorexia has a mortality rate of 2 to 15%. Of all the mental illnesses, more people die from anorexia than any other mental illness. Some people will binge eat compulsively, but without the compulsive compensatory purging or fasting. This is known as binge eating disorder. These individuals tend to be quite obese. Bulimia nervosa involves compulsive eating, binging, this is known as binging, of course, followed by self-induced vomiting or large doses of laxative, and that's purging. Some will compulsively purge, while others only purge after binging. Some will consume up to 10,000 calories in one sitting before purging. And of course, what is that? A dozen donuts and a pepperoni pizza, pepperoni and cheese pizza. That's 1,000 calories right there. So if you eat all the donuts and eat all the pizza, then you've consumed 1,000 calories. About half of college women will participate in bulimia behavior from one time or another, but to be diagnosed with bulimia nervosa, the individual must have at least one binge episode a week for a minimum of 3 months, lack of control over eating, behavior designed to avoid weight gain, persistent exaggerated concern about weight gain. Now, the reality is that when we talk about half of college women, we're mostly talking about there are select groups of individuals that are more likely to be bulimic. And those people are white, European Americans, and Asians are more likely to be bulimic. Bulimia is rarely fatal, but can have serious health consequences. Laxative dependence. Audrey Hepburn, she used laxatives to lose weight, and she eventually died of colon cancer because of overstimulation. Hypoglycemia and lethargy from eating an unbalanced diet, damaged teeth from hydrochloric acid in stomach juices, tearing and bleeding in the esophagus from vomiting, anemia, and electrolyte imbalance. Unlike almost all mental illnesses, anorexia and bulimia sufferers are 75% female. Most other people suffering from mental illness are males, but anorexia and bulimia are not exclusively female, but as you can see, 3 out of every 4 people with either problem are female. Before the 1970s, eating disorders only appeared among upper middle class women in Western cultures. Before 1900, eating disorders were unheard of. It is estimated that people in the United States suffering from eating disorders, 0.6% of the population have anorexia nervosa, 1% have bulimia nervosa, and 2.8% have binge eating disorder, where they eat way, way too much. Okay, that is the end of this chapter. We're going to go to the next chapter. I will be lecturing for another 30 minutes or so. This is substance abuse, one of my favorite topics. I want that, and I want this. Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry, that didn't work. Anyway, okay, yeah. Substance abuse. Let me make this a little bigger. Chapter 9. And of course, last week was chapter 9, or week 9. This week is week 10. So I'm a little behind as far as this is concerned. While a drug user merely uses drugs, a drug abuser abuses a drug to the extent that it impairs their biological, psychological, or social well-being. Worldwide, alcohol and tobacco are the most widely used drugs known to man. The abuse of illegal drugs, alcohol, and tobacco is the cause of more deaths, illnesses, and disabilities than any other preventable health condition. So if we could stop everybody from using drugs, we could reduce the number of deaths in the world. Alcohol is the 3rd largest risk factor for disease in the world after lack of food for children and unsafe sex. Unsafe sex, of course, has to do with the AIDS epidemic. AIDS epidemic. 2.5 million deaths a year occur due to alcohol, most because of accidents caused by the alcohol. 320,000 deaths a year are caused by alcohol use by young adults, mostly because of accidents. Alcohol is implicated in 40% of traffic deaths. Alcohol has been identified in 36% of adolescent traffic deaths. Half of all murders in the United States involve alcohol or some other drug. 80% of all suicide attempts follow alcohol use. Sorry. Another cat fight. Globally, tobacco causes 5 million deaths annually. The number is estimated to go up to 8 million annually by 2030. As you can see, we are starting to drink younger. This is in Australia, I think, because that's Fostas. Yeah, Australian for beer. And so here we have the kid with a Foster's in one hand, and he's lighting up. Somebody's lighting up his cigarette in his mouth. In 2010, 10% of graduating seniors had used Vicodin and 6% had used OxyContin. 16 million people in the United States used prescription drugs for recreational use in 2010. And of course, the number is going up. The number of heroin and heroin deaths is just skyrocketing. Should be interesting to see what happens with the coronavirus outbreak, to see what happens with individuals. Since there are so many of us that are self-isolating, I just wonder how many individuals will start having problems because they're hooked on prescription drugs and they can't get their prescriptions or they can't buy them on the streets. Oops. That's not what I wanted. There are 5 methods of administration. You can administer drugs orally, you can administer them rectally, you can inject them, you can inhale them, and you can absorb them through your skin. The fastest and most potent means of getting drugs into the system is by inhalation, and the second fastest is by injection into the bloodstream. The blood-brain barrier is the network of tightly packed capillaries that separates the blood and the brain. Drug's fat solubility determines the ease with which it passes through this barrier, as well as the placental barrier for pregnant women. Unlike the porous blood capillaries in most other parts of the body, those in the brain are tightly packed, forming a fatty glial sheath that provides a protective environment for the brain. The glial sheath develops from the nearby astrocytes. To reach the brain, a drug first must be absorbed through the capillary wall and then through the fatty sheath. And of course, not all drugs are able to do this. And this is one of the reasons why when a woman is pregnant, they try to determine what drugs will cross the placental barrier and what drugs will actually get into her brain. Some drugs will not cross the blood-brain barrier and therefore cannot get into the brain. Otherwise, not all antibiotics will cross the blood-brain barrier. So if we have an infection in our brains, a lot of times the antibiotics that we potentially can take, we can't take because they don't cross the blood-brain barrier. Once inside the brain, drugs influence the activity of neurons at their synapses. Drugs affect neurons in one of 3 ways. As an agonist, a drug that attaches to a receptor and produces neural actions that mimic or enhance those of a neurotransmitter. That's an agonist. So it acts like another drug. As an antagonist, a drug that blocks the action of a neurotransmitter. That's an antagonist that blocks the action of that drug by enhancing or blocking the reabsorption of the neurotransmitter. And of course, that's what selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors do. They block the reabsorption of serotonin specifically, and that's why they're called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. One neurotransmitter that affects the strength of dependence or addiction of any drug is dopamine. Dopamine gives the individual a feeling similar to adrenaline. It gives you a rush. Sorry, needed a drink. Cocaine and the amphetamines produce their stimulating effect by binding to proteins that normally transport dopamine, blocking its reuptake, putting more dopamine into the system. Because the dopamine isn't reabsorbed, it is allowed to stay in the synapse longer, producing a stimulating effect that gives the individual a feeling of pleasure and excitement. If too much dopamine is left in the synapse in too great an abundance or for a prolonged period of time, the individual might experience excitement that mirrors a psychotic episode. Okay, so one of the things we know is that if you're on crystal meth or you're taking an amphetamine, then one of the things that may potentially happen is if you take a little bit too much, you may have a psychotic episode. And I've known individuals, of course I've known individuals that had this problem. They had gone into psychosis. I had a student when I was at Fort Belknap who had been a meth head. She had gone off of them. She'd gotten arrested and put in jail for an extended length of time. When she got out of jail, she was clean. But every time she went to Great Falls, she felt like she needed to use again. So as long as she stayed out of Great Falls, she was okay. But of course, Great Falls and Billings are the two major metropolitan areas in Montana. And her father was in an accident, and her father had to be hospitalized. Well, where, of course, did they hospitalize him? They took him to Great Falls. And as soon as she drove into town, she found her supplier, and she was injecting the meth. So she injected herself. And of course, she used the same amount that she used before, thinking, of course, that everything was the same as it was before. But she'd been in jail for a year and a half, for 18 months, and she was clean. She was relatively clean. So when she used the amount that she normally used, back when she was a user, she got an overdose, and the overdose made her psychotic. And it took her several days before everything went back to normal. In her psychotic state, she thought she was Hispanic. She was actually part Grovant and part Aleut. She was Alaskan native. But when she was having her psychotic episode, she thought she was Hispanic. And she started speaking in Spanish, which she couldn't speak. It gets kind of weird after this. So for 2 days, she went to the police, and she said that her father had murdered her mother. But her father had just died, and her mother was still alive. But she told them that her father had murdered her mother, and that he had buried her in the backyard of this one house. And so the police went, and they dug up the backyard, and they couldn't find anything, of course. Certainly couldn't find a dead body. And about that time, she came out of her psychotic episode and got into a lot of trouble. She had to pay for them digging up the backyard. It was really kind of weird. Anyway, so I told her that she uses again, that the probability that she'll have a psychotic episode is very, very high. So the last thing I knew, she was taking care of her kids, and she was not using. So I hope she didn't go back. She did. Who knows what happened next? Teratogens are drugs, chemicals, and environmental agents that can damage the developing fetus during fetal development. This child, of course, has a cleft palate. Drug addiction is a pattern of behavior characterized by physical as well as possible psychological dependence of a drug, as well as the development of tolerance. Dependence is a state in which the use of a drug is required for a person to function normally. Withdrawal is the unpleasant physical and psychological symptoms that occur when a person abruptly ceases using certain drugs. Tolerance is a state of progressively decreasing responsiveness to a frequently used drug. The hypersensitivity theory is a theory that addiction is a result of efforts by the body and brain to counteract the effects of a drug to maintain an optimal internal state. Tolerance is caused when the brain tries to protect itself by reducing the number of receptor sites for a select drug, and that's known as downregulation. So what will happen is if you use any drug, it overstimulates your neurons in your brain, and what your brain will do to protect itself, it will reduce the number of receptor sites. That way it cannot get overstimulated again. That's one of the reasons why the first time you use a drug, you have this amazing high or you have this amazing reaction to it. And you will never ever have that reaction again. Even if you can chase the dragon all you want, but you're never going to get it. And the reason is because, and this is one of the reasons why people overdose, is because they're looking for the same high they had initially. But what happens is that your neurons are trying to protect themselves, and the way that they do that is by reducing the number of receptor sites. And because there aren't as many receptor sites to react to the drug, you can never get the same reaction you did the first time. Withdrawal is more severe because the body becomes used to having a select amount of the drug in the system, and when there is not enough, the brain and affected neurons upregulate, making them more sensitive to the drug. So and this is what withdrawal is all about. Withdrawal is where the body is trying to get back to normal. And of course, normal has been the use of this drug, and it has downregulated. And now that the drug isn't in the system anymore, of course, the neurons are looking for more stimulation. And the way they do that is by upregulating. In other words, increasing the number of receptor sites for that drug. And so they will increase it, and of course that makes you feel like there's a loss because you're not, because there are more receptor sites seeking this drug. And that is part of what withdrawal is all about. It's one of the reasons why you go through so many negative things when you go through withdrawals. Psychoactive drugs are drugs that affect mood, behavior, and cognition by altering the function of neurons in the brain and include hallucinogens, stimulants, and depressants. Hallucinogens are also called psychedelic drugs and include marijuana, LSD, and mescaline. Hallucinogens alter sensory perceptions, inducing visual and auditory hallucinations. Stimulants include nicotine, caffeine, cocaine, and amphetamines. Stimulants boost activity in the central nervous system by altering the action of acetylcholine, the catecholamines, and dopamine. The catecholamines are serotonin, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. Stimulants are widely abused because of their powerful reward effects. With stimulants, there is a rapid development of physical and psychological dependence. Withdrawal from stimulants lead to increased appetite, weight gain, fatigue, sleepiness, and in some cases, paranoia. Okay, we won't go into that. Depressants are also called sedatives, tranquilizers, hypnotics, and include barbiturates, opiates, alcohol, and general anesthetics. Low doses reduce sensory responsiveness and slow cognition. Higher doses produce drowsiness and lethargy. Depressants are highly addictive and implicated in many suicides, accidental overdoses, overdose deaths, and dependency. Depressants are often mixed with other drugs, causing drug potentiation, the effect of one drug to increase the effects of another drug. And this is also known as a synergistic effect. Opiates are drugs derived from the opium poppy, morphine, heroin, codeine. Medical researchers have used the chemical structures of opiates to create similar synthetic drugs, Demerol, fentanyl, and Dilaudid. It is estimated that there are 12 to 14 million people worldwide who use heroin, and of course we have an opiate addiction problem in the United States. As I said before, it should be interesting to see what happens with this isolation in place situation that we have right now with the coronavirus, to see what happens with all of the people with opiate and opioid addictions in the United States. Biomedical models view physical dependence as a chronic brain disease. The biomedical model often assumes that addicts inherit a biological vulnerability to physical dependence. Concordance rate is the rate of agreement between a pair of twins for a given trait. Concordant studies of monozygotic and dizygotic twins suggest that genes play a role in physical dependence with many psychoactive drugs. The withdrawal relief hypothesis is the idea that drug use serves to restore abnormally low levels of key neurotransmitters. Support for the withdrawal relief hypothesis are problems associated with neurotransmitter deficiencies, such as depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. And of course, what we're really talking about here is people who self-medicate. One of the things we've discovered is that a lot of alcoholics are depressed. And of course, the question you have to ask yourself, and the question that these people have asked themselves, the people that came up with this theory, is were they depressed before they drank the alcohol, or did they drink the alcohol because they were depressed? And the answer that they came up with was that people drank the alcohol because they were depressed and they were trying to make themselves happier. Well, that really works with alcohol. You can actually make yourself happier. It raises your serotonin level. The problem is when you're not drunk, then you feel the deficit. In other words, you become depressed when you're not, you become more depressed when you're not drunk. So it's, once again, it's like chasing the dragon. You're trying to keep from being depressed. You want to feel normal by drinking. You want to feel normal by drinking, but if you're not drinking, you don't feel normal. And of course, it gets worse and worse and worse the more alcohol you consume. The model doesn't explain why addicts begin taking a drug in the first place. The model doesn't explain why relapses are common, even long after withdrawal symptoms have subsided. The reward model views addiction as being motivated by pleasure seeking. Cocaine, alcohol, and nicotine increase dopamine levels, putting the brain's reward system into overdrive. According to Olds and Milner in 1954, the septal area of the hypothalamus is activated during all psychoactive drug use, leading to appetitive behaviors. People who are dependent on one substance are more likely to be addicted to others as well. A gateway drug is a drug that serves as a stepping stone for the use of other, usually more dangerous drugs. Some drugs that produce feelings of well-being are not considered physically addictive. The reward model is unable to explain why drug use continues even when unpleasant side effects occur. The gateway hypothesis was developed because tobacco and alcohol use historically has been considered powerful predictors of use of marijuana and other illicit drugs. But newer research findings indicate that environmental factors may have a stronger influence on the subsequent drug use. Economically deprived neighborhood environments had frequent exposure to drugs. If the individual lives in an economically deprived neighborhood environment, or if they have frequent exposure to drugs, if they had less parental control as young children, they're more likely to become addicts. Incentive sensitization theory, it's a two-stage theory. Good feelings of the drug use prevail. Why would you take a drug if it didn't make you feel good? The first time I drank alcohol, when I drink alcohol, I get depressed. So And of course, I had a hangover afterwards, and I was thinking to myself, why in the world would I make myself depressed and then have the flu the next day? It just didn't make any sense. And that may be one of the reasons why I've stayed away from alcohol. It expands on reward model, explaining that repeated drug use sensitizes the brain's reward systems to drug-related cues. Thus, they become conditioned stimuli that evoke dopamine release and craving. Social learning models view addiction as behavior shaped by learning as well as by social and cognitive factors. A person identifies with a particular drug, seeing oneself as a drinker, which plays a key role in the initiation and maintenance of addiction. According to the social control theory, the stronger a person's attachment to family, school, and other social institutions, the less likely he or she will be to break any social norms. Peer cluster theory maintains that peer groups are strong enough to overcome the controlling influence of such social institutions. So if you are one of those kids that at lunchtime you go out and smoke dope, you become part of that group. And of course, the fact that you're part of that group and you dress in a certain way and you act in a certain way, that is stronger than the pressure, the social pressure to not use drugs. When you drink a can of beer, 20% of the alcohol is immediately absorbed into the lining of your stomach and enters the bloodstream. The remaining 80% moves into the upper intestines, either rapidly or slowly, depending on the amount of food in the stomach, slowing the process down. It takes a 175-pound man 1 hour to rid their body of 1 ounce of alcohol, 1 12-ounce can of beer, a 4-ounce glass of wine, a 1-ounce glass of 80-proof liquor. Women don't have as much alcohol dehydrogenase in their stomachs, and hence they metabolize alcohol slower than men do. And of course, they're more likely to get drunk. Blood alcohol level, the amount of blood alcohol in the blood measured in grams per 100 milliliters is your blood alcohol level. 0.08 grams per 100 milliliters of blood, that's grams percent, is considered legal intoxication in most states. Up to 0.05 grams per percent makes the user feel mildly euphoric. A blood level of 0.1 grams percent makes memory and concentration dull, and motor function is impaired significantly. Between 0.1 grams percent and 0.15 grams percent, walking and fine motor skills become extremely difficult. 0.2 grams percent and 0.25 grams percent, vision becomes blurry, speech is slurred, walking without staggering is impossible, and the drinker may lose consciousness. Anything over 0.35 grams percent may cause death, depending on how much tolerance you have. Alcohol use among U.S. adults, I don't know what it is on the reservation, but this may not look normal to you. Current regular drinkers, 50.4% of the population. Actually, 64% of the population are drinkers. 36% are non-drinkers. Lifetime abstainers, 21.3%. That's not me. I consumed alcohol when I was in the service. I didn't consume when I was in college because I ran track. But when I got into the service and my wife left me the first time, my first wife left me, then people told me that what you do is you drink to forget. And of course I drank, I got drunk a couple times. I'm a non-drinker. I would be one of these 36%. I'm a former drinker, 14.3%, I guess. But I'm not. I don't drink at all. I haven't had a drink since 1976. So I would be down here at the bottom somewhere, former drinkers. Research in 2008 showed that about 50% of Americans 12 or older are current drinkers, with 14% reporting current but infrequent drinking. At-risk drinkers are drinkers who have 2 or more episodes of binge drinking in the past month, or consuming an average of 2 or more alcoholic drinks per day in the past month. At-risk drinkers are most prevalent in adults 25 to 44 years of age. Between the ages of 18 and 24, individuals have the highest rates of binge and heavy drinking. And oddly, of course, it's illegal to drink until you're 21, but so half of these individuals can't even legally drink, but they're the ones that binge drink more than anybody else. Compared with women, more men are current drinkers, binge drinkers, and heavy drinkers. Prevalence varies by ethnic and cultural background in the following order. European Americans are the heaviest drinkers. Hispanic Americans are second. African Americans don't drink very much. Asian Americans hard to drink at all. Asian Americans have less alcohol dehydrogenase in their systems, and they get a more extreme reaction when they consume alcohol, so they don't consume nearly as much. So where are American Indians? American Indians are in between Hispanics and European Americans. That's where American Indians are. Research has shown that between 30 to 50% of people who drink routinely suffer from general depressive disorder. This is a comparison to 17.1% of the general population. So as you can see, this may be a form of self-medication. Research has shown that 33% of people who drink routinely suffer from anxiety disorder. This in comparison with 5.1% of the general population. Once again, it is a form of self-medication. Research has shown that between 14% of people who drink routinely suffer from antisocial personalities. This in comparison to 1 to 3% of the general population. Once again, self-medication. Research has shown that 36% of the people who drink routinely suffer from addiction to other drugs. And of course, did the alcohol become a gateway drugs for the stronger drugs? And that is an interesting question. Alcohol breaks down into chemicals that inhibit dopamine and other neurotransmitters in the hippocampus that are associated with emotional behaviors and cravings. Prolonged heavy drinking can cause the brain to shrink, especially in women. Binge drinking inhibits neurogenesis, the process by which neurons are generated. And as you can see, there's a picture of 2 individuals who are 43 years old. One of them doesn't drink and the other one does. And as you can see, the alcoholic's brain is much smaller. There's the openings in the open areas in the brain are much, much larger in the individual who is a drinker. Korsakoff syndrome is an alcohol-induced neurological disorder characterized by the inability to store new memories. Korsakoff syndrome is caused when alcohol interferes with the absorption of thiamine. Another name for thiamine is vitamin B1. Anyway, Korsakoff syndrome the alcohol interrupts that and causes Korsakoff syndrome. Chronic use of alcohol weakens the immune system. It damages cellular DNA. It interferes with endocrine system functioning. It disrupts the secretion of growth hormone. It is linked to decreased testosterone levels, impotence, and lowered fertility in men. It's linked to decreased estrogen levels, menstrual disturbances, and miscarriages in women. So as you can see, people who are drinkers are less likely to make babies. The men actually turn into women. It raises their estrogen level and lowers their testosterone level, which makes them less masculine, I guess. If you've ever watched, there was a movie called Dead and Dying in Las Vegas. No, that's not what it was. It had Nicolas Cage in it anyway. And this prostitute was madly in love with him. And so she followed him around and helped him drink. And his idea was that he was going to drink himself to death. Well, according to the movie, the night before he died, she seduced him and had sex with him, which would have been nearly impossible. Somebody that consumed that much alcohol, of course, their testosterone level would have tanked, and their estrogen level would have increased. You actually get breast tissue would grow. If you look at men that are alcoholics, their breast tissue is larger than they have fatty breast tissue, man boobs, as it were. Anyway, these are problems that people have when they're alcoholics. Alcohol promotes formation of fat deposits on heart muscle and contributes to cardiovascular disease. Alcohol promotes the formation of ulcers and liver disease, hepatitis. You can have alcohol-induced hepatitis, and of course cirrhosis of the liver. And as a laboratory technician, I can tell you that if somebody comes in and they think that they're an alcoholic, that they have liver damage, then they will have us draw blood on them, and we would do liver enzyme tests to see how extensive their problem was. Fetal alcohol syndrome is a cluster of birth defects that include facial abnormalities, low intelligence, and retarded body growth caused by the mother's use of alcohol during pregnancy. And as you can see, this is an individual suffering from fetal alcohol syndrome. The philtrum, the crease under her nose, between her nose and her upper lip, is almost non-existent. She has a thin upper lip, a thinner upper lip than she would normally have. Short palpebral fissure length. I don't know what that means. Anyway. Behavioral disinhibition is the false sense of confidence and freedom from social restraints that results from alcohol consumption. This often results in increased aggressiveness, in risk-taking, and behavior that the individual would normally avoid. So when you get drunk, you're kind of you get kind of stupid, and you do things that you wouldn't normally do. Alcohol myopia is a tendency of alcohol to increase concentration on immediate events, reducing awareness of distant events. Abby Zawacki and McCausland in 2000, they looked at 176 college students, 88 females and 88 males. 2 alcoholic or non-alcoholic drinks were given to them every 10 minutes to look at their absorption period. They were allowed a 15-minute conversation. Trained observers coded for attentive cues and sexual interest cues. The results: drinkers exaggerated sexual interest cues and ignored ambiguous attentive cues. Alcohol allows people to concentrate on salient cues that fit their current beliefs, and for that reason, a drunk person is more likely to hit on an individual that doesn't want him to have anything to do with them. It distorts your concept. And of course, here's a picture of a guy thinking that this woman is into him, and she's the very opposite, as you can see from the picture. Alcohol dependence is a state in which the use of alcohol is required for a person to function normally. Delirium tremens is a neurological state that induced by excessive and prolonged alcohol use and characterized by sweating, trembling, anxiety, and hallucinations, a symptom of alcohol withdrawal. The sweat it stinks. And the reason it stinks is because this person's scared. Things are happening in their brains. They don't understand them. They think they're going to die. Because of that, they're scared. They're scared, and they get what they call flop sweat. And it smells like fear. And if you smell it, of course, first time, if you're not warned, the first time you smell this sweat, it keys you up, because when you smell another person that smells that is very fearful, if you smell their sweat, then you recognize that fear, and of course it keys you up. The first time it ever happened to me, they didn't warn me that it was going to happen, And of course, I got excited at the same time because I was getting this message that there was something fearful in the area. It's really kind of bizarre. Alcohol abuse is a maladaptive drinking pattern in which drinking interferes with role obligations. Estimated heritability of alcohol dependency or abuse is 0.357 for males and 0.262 for females. Among males, alcoholism in a first-degree relative is the single best predictor of alcoholism. Adopted children are more susceptible to dependency if one or both biological parents was alcohol dependent. Identical twins have twice the concordance rate of fraternal twins when it comes to alcohol dependency. Researchers have found a gene that alters the dopamine receptor, DRD2. DRD4 gene moderates alcohol cravings. DRD2 is also found in people with attention deficit disorder. These people are also more susceptible to alcoholism, as weird as that may seem. Alcohol's anxiety relieving effects may be enhanced among children of alcohol abusers. They seem to lack the feedback mechanism that signals overconsumption, so they tend to drink and drink until they get drunk. Now remember, when you're hungry, if you're eating slowly, then you know when you are satiated. But if you eat really fast, you still have 20 or 30 minutes before your brain's going to tell you, you've consumed enough. You're not really hungry anymore. And the same thing happens with alcohol. If you drink alcohol too fast, then a lot of times you'll get drunk. You'll drink until you get drunk. If you drink slowly, of course, then that's less likely to happen because your brain will tell you, whoa, dude, you've had too much. People with select personalities are prone to overconsumption. Individuals with quick tempers, individuals who are impulsive, individuals who are intolerant of frustration, people that are vulnerable to depression, and people who are attracted to excitement. That sounds like this guy, doesn't it? The guy with DRD2. That sounds like the kid with attention deficit disorder. They're more prone to alcohol consumption. Just a thought. So if somebody that you know has ADHD, then watch them. They are more likely to become alcoholics if they ever start consuming. Because when they start drinking, they will drink more than they need to, and they'll get drunk. Whereas somebody who doesn't have attention deficit, they won't have that same problem. Current models of alcohol dependency emphasize the interactions of environmental and genetic factors. Children who are problem drinkers tend to be high in sensation seeking, impulsiveness, disinhibition, deviant peer group association, and low parental control. Once again, this looks like somebody with ADHD. When they assessed the parents of problem children, they found that the parents were less supportive. They had less than ideal marriages. People who drink tend to have a temperament that includes attraction to excitement and intolerance of frustration. People who drink tend to have behavioral undercontrol, which is a personality syndrome characterized by aggressiveness, unconventionality, and impulsiveness. People who drink tend to have negative emotionality, which is a state of alcohol abuse characterized by depression and anxiety. Okay, we need to stop this in just a second. Let me see how far alcohol treatment. Okay. The tension reduction hypothesis states that drinking is reinforcing because it reduces stress and tension. The self-awareness model states that alcohol distorts information processing, making the drinker's thinking less self-critical. The self-handicapping model states that drinking is an excuse for personal failure. Social contexts exert a strong influence on drinking. Members of fraternities and sororities drink more heavily than other college students. Men who drink heavily may seek out social contexts in which this is tolerated. Same-sex groups, in other words, Yeah, so I guess fraternities make a lot of sense. Going to bars, not trying to pick anybody up, but just drinking. You're around other people that want to drink. Alcohol expectancies, beliefs have alcohol about alcohol predict its effects on the individual. Beliefs about peer use predict the individual's use. Treatment and prevention of alcohol dependence, drug treatment. One detoxification agent is naltrexone, an opiate antagonist that reduces alcohol's reinforcing properties. Aversion therapy, behavioral therapy that pairs an unpleasant stimulus such as anabuse, which makes you vomit if you drink, with an undesirable behavior, and that is your drinking, of course. This aversion therapy may be one of the reasons why I don't drink. Every time I drank, I got drunk. I've been drunk 3 times, and of course I don't drink anymore, and the reason I don't is because it made me sick. And I like I said before, I'm not stupid. I'm not real bright, but I'm not that stupid. As soon as I got drunk, I decided that wasn't the way to be. Relapse prevention programs, self-help groups, controlled drinking, drink refusal training, and coping and social skills training. Most prevention programs derive from one of 2 perspectives. The wellness theory proposes that healthy behavior is a conscious and deliberate approach among people who have a sense that their worlds are coherent and understandable. Problem behavior theory suggests that risky behaviors often occur together as a syndrome. Why don't we stop right here? We'll stop right here, and I'll pick this up next week. Let me stop it.